Welcome to The Fine Print, the podcast where we explore the law, its impact, and the people who shape it. I'm your host, Riddell, and joining us on today's episode is Associate Director of a Singaporean law firm, Terence Hua. With over 25 years of experience, he has truly seen it all. Known for his logical thinking and strategic approach, he provides practical solutions for his clients, from criminal appeals and trials to judicial reviews and even civil and contractual litigation. He's a powerhouse in the legal world. It's an honor to have you today with us, Mr. Hua. Let's begin at the start of your journey. What made you decide to specialize in criminal law?
Actually, when I first started out many years ago, I was doing commercial law, civil law, a fair bit of matrimonial work. But then again, I come from an era where there's a lot of structuring in Singapore's educational system. So I wasn't really good in things like Mandarin and some of the sciences. So over the years, I got channeled into less competitive schools, so to speak. So I had this whole bunch of friends who were from the disenfranchised part of society. And when I eventually started my practice, the longer I carried on in commercial work and all that, the more disconnected I felt from humanity. So one fine day, I just got a bit naive and I said to myself, the disenfranchised need a voice, criminals need representation. And I just changed entirely, almost overnight, into criminal practice. Since then, it has been a journey that focuses a lot on criminal law. Over the years, I've also come to incorporate many aspects of civil practice and all that back into my career. As they say, crime doesn't pay. So that balances out the accounts.
Yeah, it's very fascinating to hear what motivated you to specialize in criminal law, especially your motivation for protecting humanity and criminals. However, when you tell people you practice criminal law, what are some of the biggest misconceptions or stereotypes that you come across?
In Singapore, I find that there are two main stereotypes. The first one comes from those who don't know enough, and they think criminal lawyers in Singapore can do a lot. The truth is, criminal lawyers in Singapore function on what I call a very tight leash and a very limited bandwidth. So what do I mean? The laws are pretty strict here. So by the time you get hauled to court and you are charged, you're more or less having to serve sentence in some way or another. So your lawyer is there to navigate the system with you, and he's there to get the most lenient sentence possible. So the stuff that we see on TV, lawyer accompanying you to the police station for your statement to be recorded, lawyers battling it out in court, advocacy leads the way and all that, that's going to be something that you don't really see in Singapore courts. And of course, there's the other end of the spectrum where people think that criminal lawyers in Singapore, we can't actually do much. And that's another misnomer. In as much as I said we function on a tight leash within a very limited bandwidth, I must say there's a lot that can be achieved within the space that we can practice. There have been many lives saved. There have been many sentences which have been overturned, set aside. There have been many, many more sentences which have been reduced and lives improved because of that. So I think we have a very important role to play. It's just that we got to know the limited steps we take are actually very big steps within the structure of the industry.
Wow, what an eye-opening perspective, especially on two of the main stereotypes that we face in Singapore for criminal law. It makes me wonder that over your years in practice, how have you seen shifts in society reflected in the kinds of cases and crimes that actually make it to court?
When I first started out practice, every 3 out of 5 cases that came my way, they were invariably rioting. Those would be associated with gang activities and all that, together in groups that they fight. A lot of it will be drug consumption, and there'll be a fair share of property offences, but it tended to be violence first, drugs second, and then you got this weird balance of what I could call violent property crimes, robbery and all that. But as the years go by, we see paradigm shifts. There are not that many rioting cases these days, but there are a lot of causing hurt cases because for some reason or another, when keyboard warriors get on the other side of the keyboard, they become really aggressive. So there are a lot of fights, very, very bad injuries. There are a lot of sexual crimes also on the rise. And the sexual offences, I must say, these days, they put the sexual offences back then to shame. It's so intense now, the stuff that happens. And we have also on the rise, very obscure species of sexual offences that we would never dream of flourishing to this stage after a few years. Things like voyeurism, things like incest-related crimes, things like recording of videos, recording of gang rapes. It's all really scary. One area which is less contentious less exciting, but I think which really reflects the change in society would be the recent markup and changes in the laws applying to road traffic offences. So cars used to be a situation where if you wanted to murder somebody, you drive a car and knock him down, and then you get off with a very light fine or some little time in prison. But now they've revised a lot of sentences. So even for things that would get a short sentence last time, you see long sentences. In fact, car accidents can get you longer in jail than than an act of theft. So yeah, changes in society, they're reflected in the crimes that we see. And the judges have changed also. The judges are more open to appeals. They are more open to arguments of an extensive nature. And I must say the judges today listen far more than the judges of before. The judges of before were like strict parents. No. These days, they really, really engage you. So I'm happy with the changes. In fact, I'm very invigorated by the changes over the years.
Seeing how society evolves through the cases that come to court, such as the extremity of the sexual rape cases that you're describing, must give you quite a unique perspective. So adding on to that, since criminal law often sits right at the intersection of human behavior and justice, what have you learned about people through this work?
Acceptance. I'll be the first to admit, some of my best friends used to be my clients, and some are still even my clients. And it is actually not easy to be good friends with them because they come from a different subculture altogether. In fact, that's how they identify themselves. They don't use big words like gangs and all that. They say we have a different subculture. And what we find is that their mindset is grounded in an entirely different foundation. So if you understand the difference in the foundations, you can understand why people who commit crime have a tendency to remain in an environment where crime flourishes. One is you got to accept they prioritize sacrifices differently, to understand that what is natural for you and me, getting up, filling in a diary, planning our day, it's not quite the same as how they would do it. And most importantly, they are terrible at managing finances. Of course, I could be stereotyping, but by and large, this is how it pans out. And the truth of the matter is, acceptance is very important. Because the moment you accept, you understand them, you'll be able to, I think, as a lawyer, manage the cases better in three ways. First is, I think, emotionally, when to detach yourself, when to accept that your client is going to face a certain consequence. Number two, I don't think it's so easy to be judgmental. Once you understand the difficulties people face and why they behave in a certain way. I mean, we ourselves are not perfect. We also get into offending behavior ourselves at times. But over and above all, I think the third way in which we can appreciate and understand the entire situation better is to crime, unfortunately, is part and parcel of civilized living. Something has to be unaccepted by the general majority, and certain things will be what the general majority welcomes. So this group of persons, they happen to be, why we call them disenfranchised is because they're living on the fringe. And sometimes in order to procure and reach out for certain needs, they have no choice but to resort to unacceptable ways of getting them, not paying or forcing themselves upon a certain situation. Once we get all those in perspective, I think we can navigate the roles and tasks and the various things we have to do as criminal lawyers far more at ease with ourselves, with our clients, and with the system. We don't see ourselves as anti-enforcers or as people who are out to make a great change. I think we see ourselves as something like doctors. We are there because there's a problem. The problem exists as long as there'll be life, and we're there to provide a better life.
Wow, acceptance. One word, yet it's so powerful. And it really allows us to put ourselves in the shoes of a lawyer, and that too, a criminal lawyer, empathizing with your client, being there for them, going through it together really summarizes what it takes to be a lawyer and the kind of emotional connection that one may develop from this job. So, thinking about the future, how do you see criminal law developing in Singapore in the coming decade, and what crimes may become more or less common?
I think drugs will be on the rise again. Violent crimes will be on the rise continuously. I think gang-related crimes will start to peak a bit and moderate. Now, as for the rest of the offences, I'm not too sure. Now, why I say so is because people tend to be cloistered in their own world these days, surrounded by digital gateways. And unfortunately, that allows them to live out some kind of life that is not quite aligned with how normal human beings react with each other. We don't do our Call of Duty running around firing a gun in real life, but this is how they live maybe 20% of their time. So it's ingrained in them. And unfortunately, when they act out, they can't control themselves. So I think invariably, society will become a rougher lot, for better or for worse. Society will become less cohesive in that we don't find groups forming so that people can find connection. People find connection within a group even when they're alone in their room. So you're going to see more individualized crime, maybe more violent, and financial crime will also start to become more complicated. Everything is becoming a case of I will latch on to a bigger system like the banks, platforms to use accounts and all that. So crimes will become more sophisticated, more individualized, more violent. Drugs will be on the rise. I don't know why, but that's what I observe. And unfortunately, I think sexual offences, I don't think they'll rise in the number of offences. I think they'll intensify in the nature of how people act out when they face with offending opportunities. It could be porn has become so developed that it's so boring now. We didn't used to have the facilities to enjoy porn at high speed, high volume, high rate. But now people can. And the rapid and intense exposure that they get numbs them so much that the next time they seek a thrill, they aim for something so high, their system just overloads. So I think that's how we probably see the statistics go.
That's really thought-provoking. And it honestly just puts it into perspective of how our future may look like. You know, having drug cases, property crime, sexual assault, they're all kind of on the rise. And from what it sounds like, in a more intense way, may actually shape behaviors in society and potentially have some more legal repercussions or some more legal challenges that arise with that. So, given these changes and statistics over time, what are some of the basic rights in Singapore that everyone should be aware of?
I think in Singapore, the way to look at it is you got the right to you got the right to fresh air. And you got the right not to be a nuisance. I think if you start with those two, and as much as it sounds silly and it's not actually a basic right, I think you start to appreciate why you have certain extents of the basic rights. So you have a right to free speech. I think that's a given. But what people don't understand is this right has to be severely curtailed at times. And we cannot pitch ourselves with some of the other cultures and societies. But that's one thing that Singaporeans definitely do have. All we have to do, including myself, is that when we exercise it and we want to speak on fringe topics and all that, we got to really exercise our brains so that whatever we say will not be put down. As long as it can't be put down intellectually, the only other way people can put you down is by lawful restrictions. Now, if they use lawful restrictions, that has to operate within the realm of law. So before someone can issue a POFMA to correct my statement has to be wrong. So if I make a right statement, it's on the fringe and it pushes a very radical idea, it can stand so long as it can stand a very rigid test. That means those who want to exercise their powers of free speech to a very large extent must also be very responsible. They can't expect to do so and just be mollycoddled and get into friction with others. I think we have a right to life. That's very important, especially since Singapore still believes in the death penalty. I recently had a client executed. We tried to stay the execution. On the day he was supposed to be executed, it was supposed to be heard at 3, the application. The court dismissed it, even without hearing parties. Within 2 hours, he was hung. So what I'm trying to say from that experience is this. Before life can be taken away, other than naturally, by old age and all that, when a human takes away another life, I think we've got to always query, have we made sure to the best that we can that this is not a wrong decision? Because the guy who was hung, the guy I spoke of, my client, who would kill my friend also, he swears to me, the facts are not as how the court has found it to be. He's got a different version, but we will never know. But we do have a system that if we put it in rinse and repeat cycle long enough, often enough, maybe one day the black will become grey, the grey will become white. We will never know. So the sad thing is, we have to take every piece of black cloth that is supposed to die, figuratively speaking, and because they just put it through the rinse and repeat cycle as many times as we can, as diligently as we can, as lawfully as we can, to ensure we are really throwing away a black piece of cloth. And for those who are not in extreme situations, I think before we take up arms and say, to hell with the death penalty, we also got to understand these are very serious crimes that we speak of. I think unless you have come face to face and hands-on with persons who are affected firsthand by such situations and by such crimes, we should be less eager to promulgate a sort of philosophical view unchecked. Other than that, I think as times have come and gone, the youth today, they're more respectful of life. They're unfortunately also a bit more unbridled because of freedom of the flow of information is just amazing. So people just get exposed very quickly, very intensely, and very deeply. But again, for the few stoic persons right at the top in government who still have to maintain the system, we got to appreciate they're not doing an easy job. And we got to accept that. Until such time, we are absolutely ready. Those who are supposed to take black cloth, dirty cloth, throw it in the washing machine as best as they can, will have to continue doing that and not be disheartened. Those who are not doing that, well, don't curse the electricity that runs the machine. Those who are maintaining the machine, we need you even more. So I guess that's the best I can say about it.
What a beautiful analogy, honestly. It really puts things into perspective. And speaking of different versions of different cases, what role do you feel narrative plays in criminal defense? And how do you construct a story that is both factually accurate and persuasive for the court?
In criminal law, there are three types of settings. One is you throw in the towel, I plead guilty. And when you plead guilty, the court can't actually convict you because no trial took place. There is no evidence upon which the court can ground a conviction. So what happens is the prosecution prepares a statement. It's called a statement of facts. The accused person has to admit to the statement of facts. That statement of facts contains just enough information to give the court the evidence to convict the person. So in that setting, the defense lawyer cannot do very much to alter the narrative. What the defense lawyer can do is to establish a legal narrative so that the sentencing becomes a very scientific clinical exercise where he goes through the admitted facts and positions it in a setting where there was a similar case, quite a precedent, and based on similar facts, a far lighter sentence was given. Then, of course, you park that aside. Then you have your typical trial. In a typical trial, you have witnesses, you have your own client who gives his own account, you have victims who give their account. And I think the skill of the criminal lawyer, where the true lawyering actually occurs most of the time, his ability to draw out information from each and every witness in as far as possible his way, so that he can manipulate it in a sense that he can fit it into his client's version. And once he can do that, he becomes what I call the living time machine. He brings the judge in a believable way back to the scene, in a trustable way back to the time, where the judge can, as best as possible with words in court, witness a certain scenario, and the judge can then credibly come to a conclusion. Do I believe this or do I not? As opposed to the judge being given a 6:30 kind of footage, and then he has to just dismiss it because it makes no sense at all. The witness didn't come out with it properly. The witness was cornered and forced to say this. The judge can tell. And of course, lastly, we have those applications where it's not so evidence-based. It's an argument based on a certain legal point, whether if this point is right or this point is wrong, what will be the consequences? If I'm right on this point, he hangs. If I'm wrong on this point, then he serves a 20-year sentence. So that kind of narrative actually involves a lot of skill. When I say skill, I mean intellectual skill, because those who are good at it, I'm not so good at this, but those who are good at it, from what I observe, they are very learned in the law, and they take a very abstract concept from a few sources and they make it into a 3-minute nutshell. And it's amazing. When you watch a senior practitioner who does that well do it, it's like watching the sunset or the sunrise. It's a quirk of nature that is so beautiful you can't replicate it yourself. You can only watch it. And when I see that, right, I know there's a high ground I won't reach in this life, maybe in the next life. So I think those are the three forms of narrative, and each play a different role in a different setting. The trial one does most of the grunt work. The pleading guilty sort, well, it's more of doing the best you can. The abstract stuff, it's reserved for very specialized situations where you really need that kind of special expertise. In every scenario, it's always going to change a life in terms of criminal practice. So always, it's got its own importance.
Yeah. Well, breaking it down into 3 very clear kinds of arguments makes it a lot more concise and understandable for our listeners. So thank you so much for that. Adding on finally, what do you believe are some of the key skills a lawyer must develop to enter this field? Maybe adding on to what you said before or expanding on some of those skills.
In this day and age, I think your Google searching on the internet is going to be top notch. But as with all searches, I think the next skill, which used to be the most basic and fundamental skill a lawyer I think must have, the ability to read. Otherwise, your third skill, which is your oral advocacy invariably talk rubbish or outdated stuff. So I think these rank the first three, meaning I say your powers of procurement of information rank first. Second would be your powers to read and analyze the information. Thirdly would be to represent them in the best possible way. The last skill, unfortunately, I don't think can be learned. It can only be acquired or something you're born with. And it's the skill of persuasion. So that I'm not too sure, but I'm pretty sure it's the fourth skill that is the most important skill. Beyond that, the fifth one would be hypnosis. Then you just...
Yeah, those are honestly very crucial skills for the courtroom and especially presenting a case in front of the court. So finally, what guidance would you offer to aspiring criminal lawyers who want to build a practice in this field?
Drawing from my own experience. Of course, I wouldn't ask them to, friends, that each has his own journey. But one thing I can all share along, have common on our paths if we are going along this route is something called contact with clients. So each and every client that walks through the door, he may engage you, he may not engage you. He may engage you countless times, he may engage you 3 times. I think every time we have a chance to engage with a client, as long as we can form a real relationship, it doesn't have to be a deep or bro kind of relationship. But each and every time we get to do that and dispense real care, like a doctor would, that will naturally give you the foundation to apply the 4 overarching skills of actual lawyering over it, which is again your research, your oral presentation and all that. So it's really client contact.
Amazing. So thank you so much for your time, insights, and your analogies, Mr. Hua. And to all my listeners, court is now adjourned until our next session with the fine print.